Hey there guys, Brad again with another Bearded Man in the Van episode. This is an Ask Brad, and this is something that I get asked about a lot. And on the back of yesterday's TV interview on Studio 10, there's a link on the Facebook page, and there should be a link via Instagram. I'm going to be discussing what I'm asked a lot, which is about introducing a child into the home. What can people do to prepare the dog? Now, I'll do this video on the fly. It's definitely going to be a bit longer, and I would encourage those of you that have something to do to maybe just stick the sound on and play the sound while I'm talking. You're not going to be missing any visuals. So when it comes to introducing a new child into the home, particularly difficult for a lot of people where the dog or dogs pre-exist the baby in terms of belonging to the household and being part of the family. So the first thing that you really need to consider is it's almost certain that your dogs are going to have to accept change, which means that in many regards your dog is highly likely to have to adapt to some very novel situations. So in terms of actually getting your dog prepped for that, you need to just ask yourself, day to day, week to week, month to month, what actions do you take? What do you do to ensure that your dogs encounter novel situations, and that when they encounter them, you give them a range of coping strategies that they can use to navigate them well. And also, amongst those coping strategies, make sure that you appropriately reinforce the dog for making great decisions, even just better decisions than it used to make. So that's number one. Now, being able to do that really means that you need a framework of understanding with the dog, a framework of learning, if you will, in order to communicate effectively, because dogs will never speak human and humans will never speak dog. And so what training does is it creates a shared language. And without a clear shared language, I mean, if you speak French and I speak English, and this is a reasonable analogy for how most people are with their dogs. If you speak French and I speak English, you're going to understand some of the words because there is some common ground between French and English, and you're going to understand the occasional word. And if I say enough words, you'll understand more. And if I use my hands to gesticulate and point and help work things out, you'll understand a little bit more. And that's where most dogs live in their households. That's the reality, is that the dogs don't understand most of what is said or asked of them. And often, if we drill down into things, dogs don't understand things as the owners believe that the dog does understand them. So the only way to really establish that, guys, is through training. And so again, it brings us back to the earlier point. What are you doing day to day, week to week, month to month in order to make that happen? Now, another thing that is invaluable is if you're going to introduce a dog to the household, you need to be able to confine that dog for the safety of the baby and for the safety of the dog. Crate training is the only real feasible vehicle for that. And by crate training, I'm not talking about just have your dog accept going into a crate. What we're talking about is progressing the crate training of the dog towards becoming a vehicle for independence training. Independence training is really about the dog coming to a point where he's comfortable in his own skin, on his own, removed from stimulation, where his movement is restricted and he is confined, and he readily accepts that and relaxes and chills out. And that's an area where a lot of people that crate train don't really go to, and it's something that's very, very important if you're introducing a dog to the family. A couple of other things that are worth pointing out is that most people live in the house with their dogs really without too many rules. It's a pretty free-flowing existence. And it's the type of existence that everything is a negotiation and a back and forward, and it's very familial. You know, if your dog has traditionally helped itself to the couch, jumped up onto the bed, gives really exuberant jumping type greetings, doesn't reliably stay on its bed without being asked a whole bunch of times. These are things that you want to start to address before the baby comes home, because if you don't do that, what you need to understand is that in the presence of the baby, you now start imposing yourself on the dog, and there's a great potential then for the dog to start seeing the baby, or the presence of the baby, as the source of that imposition and the reason for that imposition. And that's something that you really want to try and avoid, because especially early days, you want to be able to focus on forming positive or neutral, ideally neutral associations between the baby and the dog, and the presence of the baby. You would like for the presence of the baby to be seen as good, but not a reason to go into a state of arousal. There's some very important things. The other thing that you might want to think of is trying to, if the dog has traditionally slept on your bed, right, you want to try and set up, months prior to the baby coming home, you really want to try and set up, better sleeping arrangements that are far more suitable to what you're trying to achieve long term. And so there are a couple of key considerations. Stuff that people think about less though is, for instance, car trips. So where the dog may have sat on the back seat or the front seat months before the baby starts coming home. What you really need to do is you need to teach that dog to be confined in a travel crate in the back of the car. You need to be really clear about that, because especially if your dog maybe gets a scare easily or whatever, an infant can be horribly damaged by a scared dog trying to climb over from the back seat. So you need to really think about the way in which you contain your dog. And again, it adds another quiver to your bow in terms of being adequately prepared if you get that work out of the way months in advance. Now, exercise regimes are something that people tend to form habits in providing to their dog. So it doesn't tend to be random, it tends to be the same time of day, so on and so forth. And that's almost certainly going to change when you bring a new baby home, because of the lack of sleep, right? Because of the completely ad hoc schedule that infants tend to impose upon family life. So you want to start addressing that, so that you're not dealing with a dog that feels in some way entitled to a walk at 5 p.m. It may not worry you every day, but again, we really want to sort of adjust. We want to adjust everything that we can, and the goal is that nothing is a problem when you come home. And the dog may be slow to accept or like the baby, and if that's the case, that's fine. You don't want to have to be dealing with that, plus having to deal with all the other brain damaging factors that are inherent to bringing a new infant into the house. So look, that's heaps to get started for you guys. Of course, there's many more points that we could add to this, but they are some of the big ticket items. And one more that I'd like to add is, when you crate train your dog, get your dog used to eating meals in the crate, because kids and dogs and food bowls, they certainly don't mix. So that's something else to add to your list. But that's a laundry list of stuff for most folks to get onto with their dogs. Please do it ahead of time. One of the joys of pregnancy in this case is the fact that it goes on for 9 months. So you've got 9 months to get this squared away, even if you haven't done a lick of training with your dog prior. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm about to jump out of the van. I hope that this has been useful to some of you. If you're in mothers groups, fathers groups, new parent groups, whatever, and you think that this is a resource that can be useful to people, please go ahead and share it. I hope that it fits the bill and really legitimately helps some of you out there. So that's it for now, guys. I'm Brad Griggs, Canine Services. international, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye bye.